Hello, my fellow gacha addicts. This is going to be a video talking about Xilonen and whether I think it was worth it to pull for her C2 or not, because I did, of course, get her C2 as well as her signature weapon, and overall they're fairly good, but there's also some things that you should take note of when you get it. And this will also be some sort of, a basic discussion of Xilonen in general. So what does Xilonen's C2 do? First, we should also talk about her C1, I guess, for anyone that's interested, since you have to get it to get to her C2. It makes it so that her Night Soul points decrease at 30% less speed, and her time in her Night Soul state can be extended, or is extended, by up to 45%. This is decent, I guess. It's nice for exploring so that you can run around in her skates more. So that's okay, and it also makes it easier to stay on field if you try to use her as a main DPS, because then you don't run out of time nearly as fast, so that's nice. And the second part of it is when her source samples are active, she also gets gives nearby active characters, including herself or teammates, interruption resistance. This is not perfect interruption resistance, it's like a medium amount, so you won't get staggered as often, but really big hits are still going to screw you over. Overall, it's okay. I wouldn't recommend pulling this though if you don't plan to go for C2. Just C0 is totally fine if you don't want her C2. Going for just C1 is not really recommended. But her C2 is where things get really spicy. Xilonen's geo source samples will always remain active. Now, this is a little bit confusing, and we'll get to that after I explain the second part. Additionally, when her source samples activate, all nearby party members will gain effects corresponding to the active source sample that matches their element's type. So if you have electro source samples, it gives 25 energy and decreases their elemental burst cooldown by 6 seconds. This, how it works, because it's different than a buff like the other ones that it gives, is it activates when the source samples are created. So after you make them with your elemental skill. So after you do what is usually 2 basic attacks if you don't have, more than 2 geo characters. So whenever you do that, it'll give energy and reduce the burst cooldowns of all of your electro teammates. And because of the short cooldown on Xilonen's skill, you can actually kind of spam it. So it's pretty good for getting energy and stuff. And you can do some funny stuff with it. For cryo characters, they get 60% crit damage. And all of the buffs here apply to the character regardless of the type of damage you're doing. So if I have the cryo source sample active and my cryo character is dealing damage, but it's not dealing cryo damage, it will still increase the damage dealt. For example, with like Rosaria, right? Since she's cryo and you build her for physical damage sometimes, it's still going to give the crit damage buff to Rosaria. So against this robot chicken guy right here, if we go here, you can see we have 105.1% crit damage. And then if we go ahead and activate our source samples right here and go back to Rosaria, 165.1% crit damage. So someone like her can still benefit even if she's not dealing cryo damage. She'll still get that bonus crit damage. Granted, you won't get the elemental res shred that her source samples give, so it's still not like optimal for Rosaria, but it's there if you care about that. For Hydro characters, they get 45% max HP. This is pretty nice because, it's just more damage on a lot of characters that skills HP or more healing, that sort of thing. Pyro characters get 45% attack. This is very, very mediocre. Honestly, the worst part of her C2, because Pyro characters already have a lot of attack. Like the resonance when you have 2 Pyro characters, that already is giving you extra attack. And a lot of people like to use Bennett, who is giving you like 1,000 attack. That's a huge attack buff. Or there's also Hu Tao, who gets a massive amount of attack from casting her skill because it converts HP into attack. She's not HP skilling, but she is. It's just weird like that. So not really worth it. I definitely wouldn't pull for C2 if you just plan to use her with Pyro characters exclusively, but I don't know why you would only use her with Pyro characters. And then the last part of it is Geo source samples will give the Geo character a 50% damage dealt. And this will not be reflected in your stats because this is plus 50% damage dealt, not plus 50% geo damage dealt. It's plus 50% damage dealt as a bonus to geo characters. So it can be a little bit confusing. So if we take Xilonen out of the party and we go up to this enemy right here, we can view our stats on Shiori right now, right? 84, 152. We've got, you know, not important stuff. And our geo damage right now is at 15%, or sorry, 0%, sorry, 15% geo res. We have no geo damage bonus, and we also have no physical damage bonus. No damage bonus at all on the character. So if we whack this enemy, 75 damage it deals when he's got his DR, but once he's up, that's 448. Now, if we add Xilonen into the party, her source samples from the Geo one always being active, the Res Shred won't do anything because it shreds elemental damage of Geo, not physical damage. So, even though we have Xilonen in the party now, though, you can see our damage bonus has not gone up at all. None of these numbers have gone up, even though we have Xilonen in the party. But it's still going to, first off, you can see we get the arrows down, showing that the Res Shred for elements is applying to the enemy. And now, look at that, 673. Even though it's not reflecting the damage bonus in the stats, that 50% damage bonus is applied to all of the damage on a Geo character. And that also covers how her Geo source samples remain active. It will just always be active, regardless of whether you activate the source samples or not. It is 100% of the time, so long as Xilonen is in the party, you will always be shredding nearby resistance to Geo and giving a damage bonus to Geo characters, which is really, really nice. I was very confused by it first because it wasn't reflecting in the stats as giving a damage bonus. So I was like, is it broken? Is it bugged out? No, it doesn't reflect it there, but I can assure you that it is working. Now, is this worth it? Is it worth it for a constellation? In the case of Pyro characters, I already said, I don't really think it's worth it. It's meh there. For Hydro characters, it's decent because, you know, you can get more damage or healing. That's all right. The crit damage on crowd characters is actually pretty huge, especially because they already have a lot of crit rates. So this is going to be a decent damage buff. The Electro is interesting. You don't usually have energy issues on Electro characters. Not most of them, at least. There are some characters that have issues with Electro or energy, but most of them are fine, right? Like, especially because the Raiden exists and people like to use her a lot with other characters, and she batteries them up and she batteries herself, so you don't have an issue. But there would be other characters, like maybe Sara could use the extra energy, or Beidou is the main one that comes to mind. But again, most Electro characters, in my experience, don't really have energy issues a lot of the time, other than Beidou or Sino. Now, the burst cooldown can be pretty funny. It's not always extremely practical. If you're doing tight rotations, then maybe it can help, like very short rotations and you want to wrap back around as fast as possible. It can help with Clorand teams, so you can burst more often. If you are also using the 4-piece Thundering Fury, so you get your skill back, because Clorand has low on-field time, so you can just really tighten up your rotations to get them out in like really short, really high burst damage rotations as fast as possible. It's not really needed on Raiden, but it can help if you want to use your big sword on Raiden as much as possible. It's decently nice on a character like Yaimiko, since she has a 22-second burst cooldown and a 90 energy cost on her burst. So it's actually really helpful for her, but overall it's just kind of there. It's interesting, but not like a game changer in most scenarios. The main reason I would pull her C2 is for the damage dealt for Geo characters, right? On top of the Geo source samples always remaining active. Now, part of Xilonen's kit is that for her to apply or create the source samples, you have to have at least 2 Petch characters in the team, right? Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro. And if you don't, you cannot create the source samples. So let's say I have 2 Geo units and 1 Dendro, 1 Anemo. I don't know why you do that. That's weird. Or let's say 2 Anemo instead, right? You're not going to create the source samples. Or let's say you have 3 Geo characters and 1 of any other element. You're not going to create the source samples. So if you're trying to do that to get res shred to Geo for a Geo dealing damage teammates, then you're completely screwed over by not being able to run triple Geo. And that's a problem because a lot of the Geo characters wants to have more than 2 Geo teammates, especially for like particles and stuff. There's obviously Xilonen is going to be one of the Geo characters you'll be using. In Navia's case, you don't really have an issue because she really wants 2 Petch characters anyways for her A4 passive. But on other characters, like let's say Noelle really wants more than 1 other Geo teammate. Because you could go with Goro, right? Goro's really good. He's going to give a bunch of depth. But then you could also go with Chiori. Chiori is also a really good character. You could you might want to go 4 Geo characters: Chiori, Xilonen, Goro, and Noelle. But you can't do that and get the buff still with Xilonen, which is a problem. But you completely have that fixed with her C2. That problem is gone entirely. And on top of that, you no longer have to worry about uptime, because while it does have a 15-second uptime, sometimes the source samples will run out before you're finished with your rotation, and you obviously lose that damage because it's gone at the tail end of your rotation when you're still dealing damage. But because the Geo source sample will always be active, you don't have to worry about uptime because, well, it's permanently up. And then obviously the 50% extra damage to Geo is pretty huge as well, because Geo characters can't make use of reactions to like actually help with their damage, because crystallize is a thing, sadly. But the extra Geo damage is obviously nice to get more damage to your Geo teams, and it's really good for that. But there's an issue with that, okay? There's a pretty big issue, and my problem with it is that she doesn't heal anymore, okay? When you have triple Geo teammates, or sorry, less than 2 Petch teammates, it doesn't just make it so she doesn't create her source samples anymore. It also converts her into a more DPS oriented setup. It makes it so that her elemental burst has 3 ticks of damage instead of 1, but it no longer heals. And that's a really big problem because Farina exists. And, well, Farina's really broken, and a lot of the time, if you want maximum damage, you would think you would want to go with Xilonen and Farina together, especially on a team with, like, Noelle. But you don't have the healing for that anymore. So you can run triple Geo characters and still get the source samples, but then you're screwed because you don't have heals still, which means you have to run a healer. And I found that to be a really big problem for if I'm trying to get Farina and Xilonen in the same team. So here is an example with a Noelle team. We have Noelle, and she's the healer. Okay, so this fixes it. All right, because we still have a healer here. But let's say I wanted to run Navia, right? Even though you kind of want 2 Petch characters, let's say I wanted to run Navia here. And then I want Xilonen for a damage buff. I want Farina because she gives huge damage buffs. And then I want Chiori because Chiori's insane, despite what some people might say. Well, now I have a problem. I can't heal. I can't heal to build up Farina's burst. And that's not exactly optimal. Or let's say I wanted to have like Yunjin. You could even go like Yunjin here instead. You're still pretty much screwed. Or if you wanted Chiori as the main DPS as well, because that's an option for some people. I like to run main DPS Chiori. It's kind of a meme, but it's funny. Or if you have C6 on her. Well, now, again, you're going to have to run a healer, which means you're giving up the potential for Goro's pretty decent buffs to like death and Geo damage and crit damage and interruption resistance. You lose out on that as an option because you have to go a proper healer. Yeah, I know technically Goro can heal with the C4. That's not really enough healing for Farina's. So then you end up having to waste a slot just to build Fanfare. And you can't, like, you know, have the benefit of an Animo healer that can then shred resistance even more because, well, you can't swirl Geo. So that's a really big problem. And I don't know, I guess it's really not that big of a problem. I'm probably making it seem like it's a bigger issue than it is, but in my personal experience, it's kind of annoying, And I really wish Xilonen held on to the healing aspect of her kits. Even if you had multiple Geo characters, or at least like at C2, it would fix that. That doesn't mean it's bad at all, and you can still just run Farina on another team, right? Like, let's say you don't run Farina at all. Farina's opened up to go on a different team, and then your Geo team doesn't have to have her anymore. Then, well, you're fixed. Ignore Kaching. I don't know why I put Kaching here. So it's always nice to have a really crazy buffer on both sides, because Farina and Xilonen are both, well, crazy buffers. But, you know, I digress. It's a thing, and it's something that you should keep in mind, because I didn't know this before I got Xilonen C2, so I think it's worth mentioning, or good to have this information for when she comes back, because her banner is gone now. So if you missed her, that's a yowzas. Now, after that, on to her signature weapon. Okay, we're going past her C2 now. We're done with that, because I also want to talk about her signature weapon and whether this is worth it or not. It's decent, but honestly, I don't think it's necessary. It gives a humongous badungus amount of defense, and the passive to it, you get, it's kind of complicated, but it's also pretty straightforward. Gain Ode to Flowers after normal or plunging attacks hit an opponent. Def increases by 8%, and elemental damage increases by 10% for 6 seconds, with a max of 2 stacks, and you can only trigger 1 stack per 10th of a second. When the effect reaches 2 stacks, its duration is refreshed, and all nearby party members are given 8% elemental damage bonus for every 1,000 defense Xilonen has, up to a maximum of 25.6% damage bonus. And this buff lasts for 15 seconds. If you want to get the max amount of damage bonus from this, you are going to need 3,200 defense. But once you take into account that this gives extra def once you start hitting enemies, and Xilonen's A4 passive, which gives another 20% defense, you actually only need just under 2,900 defense to be able to get the full damage bonus. And the extra damage in def is pretty big for her as a DPS if you decide to use her like that, so that's nice. But it's not really a huge amount of damage to the team, especially when you consider how much damage you're going to be giving to the team as is. So let's say you're using her with her, well, signature quotes, artifact set, the Scroll of the Hero of the Cinder City. Well, this is going to give you 40% extra damage bonus to your teammates and yourself, usually. And then if you have any other sources of damage increase, right, like let's say there's C2, that's like 50% damage to Geo, or you add in a teammate, let's say you're trying to buff Chiori's, you usually have a lot of damage buff from goblets, okay, artifact sets, like 2 pieces and 4 pieces, other sources of teammates, like Farina, if you try to put her in the same team as a Farina, who's going to give you an extra 75% damage bonus if you have her crowned, or like C2, that's up to 100%, or C3, that's 120%. So this 25.6% damage bonus will just round down to 25%. That's easier. That's actually going to end up being a lot less than you would think. In most scenarios, it's likely going to be about a 10% damage increase. Not all scenarios, like it might be better in some than others, of course, but in most, on average, it's going to end up being around 10%. And in some scenarios, if you're really overkilling on damage, it can be even less than that. So the damage bonus to the team, while it's nice, it's not necessary, especially once you consider that you're giving up the option of running the Favonius Lance instead. Because Favonius is insane. It gives you a huge amount of ER, basically completely removes any problems you might have with energy on Xilonen herself. And it also batteries up teammates because it gives you those white particles, which gives a pretty fair amount of energy to the whole team. So it's like, do you want a little bit more damage for the team, but you also give up a lot of extra energy? I don't know. I mean, I still think it's better most of the time than Favonius, but it's not so much better that I think it's worth getting, to be honest. The only reason I really pulled this is because I was trying to get Chiori's signature weapon. So if it weren't for that, I would have skipped this and just stuck with the Favonius Lance. So when she comes back around, unless you really want to like hard main her or make her a DPS or something, or like maximum possible damage as optimized as you can get. Unless you're one of those scenarios, I would just skip it entirely and stick with Favonius Lance, because it's comfortable and it's very easy to get. Most people are going to have a Favonius Lance. Even if it's R1, it's still going to be pretty good, because the cooldown on an R1 isn't that bad. That's mostly it, I guess, for her signature weapon and her C2 as what I think about them. Just some interesting things to keep note of when thinking about getting it, or be it whether you got it already, or with her not upcoming, but it's sometime in the future rerun, which will probably be like 6 months from now, so whenever that ends up happening. If you liked the video, then maybe leave a like or subscribe. That would be absolutely massive, huge bungus dedungus for me. So yeah, that's gonna do it. Goodbye.